The bill that I will ask this committee to move forward is Senate File 2680. They both arise out of the same set of circumstances. You may recall that there was an incident, I believe it was in Anoka County, in which a young woman who happens now to be sitting to my right, Asma Jama, was having dinner at a restaurant and speaking in her native language, which was not English. And she was surprised by an attack by a woman who had been sitting at the booth next to hers, who swung a heavy beer mug at the face and struck Ms. Jama in the face, and made comments to make it quite clear that it was motivated by the fact that Ms. Jama was not speaking English. Clearly an attack that was motivated by bias. The Anoka County Attorney's Office, when determining what charges they could bring, in their evaluation of the statutes, found that they could not enhance a felony level assault based upon a bias motive, that our bias crime statutes applied to misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor level assaults, but our statutes did not include the bias enhancement language in the felony assault categories. So when I heard about this on the news, it seemed to me that that was an error that the legislature could correct. A crime that is motivated by bias is uniquely corrupting to our society. It's an offense not only against the individual victim of the physical assault, but it's an offense against all of the community. And that is the premise that lies beneath all of the bias crime language that we have in various places in the statutes. It's particularly troublesome when it's a physical assault because of the obvious harm that is caused to the individual and the sense of discomfort that it would place upon the entire community that could be victimized, and those who may not fall into any of those categories. Although one might say that most of us would fall into one or another category depending upon the motive of the person who's committing the assault. So the bill that you have before you focuses on the felony assault crimes. And then there were a couple of considerations as to how we would handle it. The bill itself has a percentage increase in the maximum penalty for the offense. The bill provides that the statutory maximum is 25% longer than the maximum penalty otherwise applicable. And the reason we do that is because to pick a specific number of years would cause a disproportionality between the bias enhancement between a crime that's a 5-year felony and a crime that's a 15-year felony, for example.
It was October 30th, 2015. We were going out to dinner, 2 adult cousins and my 4 nieces from 11 to 4. So we waited for like 15 minutes to be seated down. So once we were taken to our seat, there's the lady that eventually ended up attacking me was looking at us. But then that didn't faze us. We didn't care. So we just went, we sat down. And the first thing she said, because we were speaking Swahili amongst ourselves, then she said, if you live in America, you have to speak English. So we ignored her, we sat down, we ordered for the kids, and then she continued saying, if you're in America, you have to speak English. I turned around and I said, ma'am, obviously we can speak English. We choose not to because we're with family. But then I thought that was it. That was the end of the confrontation. But then she continued telling us to go back home, and that if you're in America, you have to speak English. She continued being very belligerent and very loud. Because of the kids, I had to keep telling her to calm down and that it was okay, that obviously we could speak the language, we just chose not to again. But then it escalated very fast to where she was standing up, and I thought she was leaving, and I was sitting down talking to the manager. Then I thought she was leaving. Apparently, when I turned around to look at her, she had a beer mug in her hand, and she threw it across my face. And then I had 17 stitches on my face.
Senator Latz, the aspect of hate crimes and bias crimes is something that I've always struggled with, and I will continue to struggle with, I'm sure, as we go forward. But as I understand what you are attempting to do with this particular bill is, in Ms. Jamal's case, according to the article, the crime was charged out as a third-degree assault, which is a felony. And under your bill, I don't know if that was ultimately the conviction, but if it was charged out and convicted as a third-degree felony, then there would be an enhancement of up to 25% if this particular bill was adopted. And that isn't available now, but it is available on misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors. Did I understand that correctly?
Senator Latz.
Madam Chair, Senator Newman, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Newman.
Part of the difficulty that I have with this kind of a bill is sort of twofold. And, maybe you can help me understand, but part of it is, one of the elements of a crime of this type uses the language of actual or perceived intent, for lack of a better word. And that becomes very subjective, pretty difficult in my mind, whereas, most of the time when we deal with crimes, there are certain elements, and they're very objective. Intent really isn't all that objective. Intent to me is a subjective standard, and pretty difficult sometimes for, say, a jury to handle and understand. And now we're going to throw at them this actual or perceived bias, where they're going to have to look into the mind of the actor and try and determine what they have perceived. Now, in the case of Ms. Jamal's incident, it looks like the actor here disagreed with her country of origin, is the way it looks like it lines up the best for me. So the first problem that I just wanted to mention to you is that what I see as a pretty subjective standard becomes to be applied in these bias cases and hate crimes. And I do struggle with that notion. The other thing that I struggle with, Senator Latz, on bias and hate crimes is it feels to me like we elevate the victim in a hate crime to be more important than the victim in a crime that doesn't involve bias. It involves maybe vengeance or anger or maybe pecuniary gain, but it's certainly not bias. And it feels like as a society we are elevating that victim in the bias case to be more important in our community than the victims who are not victims of crime that involve bias. And what we're really supposed to be doing is treating everybody the same. Everybody should have equal rights, be treated the same. And so I do struggle with that notion of the reason why we're going to treat a bias crime differently. It's heinous. I absolutely agree with you. But those are the two aspects of your bill and this notion of hate crimes that I struggle with, and it's kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have sometimes because they're so awful, but are not, striking someone in the face with a beer mug and seriously injuring them because you're angry or jealous. Is that also not really a serious matter? And if we're going to enhance a penalty in one, why do we not enhance the penalty in another? So those are my thoughts, Senator Latz. More conversation than anything else. I don't even know if there's a question in there. Thank you, Senator Latz.
Senator
Thank
Latz.
you. Madam Chair, just for the record, our testifier's name is pronounced Jama, just so the record is clear on that. Secondly, I do wish to respond to Senator Newman's comments because they're important factors to consider here, and I respect that. Yes, these standards are subjective, and if you look at the human rights statutes, if you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you look at the federal Title VII and the Equal Employment Opportunity laws on the federal level, you will find the terms actual or perceived all over the statutes, and there's an important reason for that. It's because what you're getting into is the mindset of the perpetrator. So whether or not they perceive Ms. Jama to be from an African country or from Canada or from some other place, it's the motivation that's in their mind that we are trying to address here. I'll give you an example, and this is common in the disability field especially, but if there is a person that is perceived to have a disability, perhaps a learning disability or some other kind of disability that's recognized under the law, and they may not actually have it, but they are treated differently in the workplace because of the perception that they have that disability. That is also noxious behavior that is actionable under the human rights laws. If you have someone who has an anti-gay bias and they perceive that someone is gay, but in fact that person is straight, but because of their misperception, they treat that person differently, don't give them a raise, don't give them the promotion, give them worse assignments at work. That is also noxious behavior, and it has a bad effect on the recipient end of that bias as well. So the same principle would apply in a criminal case. Ms. Jama may not have been attacked had she been speaking English, even though her skin color it might suggest from some, or the fact that she's wearing a headwear might suggest that she's of a different faith or from a different part of the world than perhaps the person who was eating dinner or drinking anyway next to her, thought was appropriate. But if the attack itself was motivated by that and not by a suggestion that she was saying something content-wise that was offensive, it's a different kind of a motivation. And I would also note that whether it's perceived or actual, the effect is just as corrosive on the rest of the community. More so than, I would submit, an attack based upon anger or jealousy. The other thing I'm going to add on that point, Senator Newman, is that the prosecutor the state still has the burden to prove that the motivation was bias beyond a reasonable doubt. So if for some reason a jury were to conclude that no, the actor really wasn't motivated by bias here, it was for some other cause that they struck Ms. Jama, then that element of the offense would not be proved, and on a special verdict form, they would not check off the box that says, you know, is the crime motivated by bias? Now, the question of elevating a crime because of the bias motivation, we again come back to the concept that a crime motivated by bias is more of an offense against society than a crime motivated by jealousy or anger, or whatever the particular assault may be caused by. If I'm jealous that you have a nice suit on and I don't, and I feel so angry about it, I'm going to punch you in the face, to me, that's not as offensive to the whole community. It's perhaps more particular to you. If you say something, or you do something, or you look at me in such a way that I feel angry about it, I'm responding to some particular action that you have done, an assault between two people who are verbally jousting, having a verbal fight, and it elevates to a physical fight, if it's over whatever, you know, the topic happens to be. To me, that's a more individualized interaction. But when the assault is because of a perception that is much broader in concept, in this case, race or nationality or skin color, to me, that's a much more egregious kind of conduct, and we ought to make a special statement as a society that it's not appropriate, even less appropriate than an assault for the other reasons that we've talked about.